Hello and welcome to The Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm reviewing the 2011 to 2013 series Ultimate Comics Spider-Man, also called Ultimate Comics All New Spider-Man because it introduced the new character of Miles Morales. To talk about this comic, first we have to go back to the year 2000, when Marvel created a new imprint that served to reboot their comics into a new universe. This Ultimate Universe, led by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley's Ultimate Spider-Man, gave classic characters and stories a modern update to help eliminate the cheesiness left over by Golden and Silver Age comics in the main Marvel Universe. It also allowed young readers to get into the stories without having to know the up to 60 years of backstory the main Marvel continuity had at the time. At least, that was the idea. What I think Marvel never got was that there were two basic reasons that people liked the Ultimate imprint. The first was that people were interested in Marvel already enough to know a little bit about its history and appreciate how the imprint respectfully modernized those characters and stories. The second was that it was easy to pick up and follow along with everything, as there wasn't 60 years of history, but also there weren't a bunch of convoluted crossovers confusing everything. This was Marvel's chance to start fresh with clear-cut storylines, heavily limited crossovers, and refreshing new takes on time-tested classics. So, of course, Marvel did none of those things. Assuming, wrongly, that their readers were all new readers, and assuming, again wrongly, that what people liked were the new and different, Marvel kept pushing for crazier and crazier reimaginings inside of bigger and bigger crossover events. This led to a convoluted mess filled with characters completely unrecognizable from their 616 counterparts. So it was that after less than 9 years, Marvel did a soft reboot of the Ultimate Universe, again led by Bendis and his Spider-Man. This too was short-lived, as soon they decided on more wackiness and killed off their Peter Parker to replace him with a completely original Spider-Man, Miles Morales. Given all this, it's not hard to see why there was a lot of anger at the news of this beloved character, whom fans had spent over 10 years getting to know and love and associate completely with the Ultimate Universe, being killed off. It certainly made little sense for one of the headlining characters in a story dedicated to reimagining the 616 universe to be a character with no 616 counterpart. But it's also pretty unfair to not give Miles a chance, just because he's not the person who came before. So with that in mind, let's take a look at his story and take this away. Miles' story starts with his uncle Aaron Davis, who is the Ultimate Universe version of the old Marvel supervillain the Prowler, breaking into Oscorp Labs. In the Ultimate Universe, Norman Osborn, head of Oscorp, was attempting to recreate the super soldier serum that made Captain America back in World War II. For some reason, this involved spiders, and eventually they created the genetically modified spider that bit Peter Parker and turned him into the first Ultimate Spider-Man. Attempts to recreate this happy accident led to Osborn himself becoming the Green Goblin, and his son Harry becoming the Hobgoblin. After Osborn was discovered to be the Green Goblin, his company was shut down and the projects were abandoned. But corporate espionage being what it is, someone hired Prowler to break into the abandoned lab and steal some company secrets. A new experimental spider, numbered 42, sneaks into Prowler's booty bag so it can later sneak out and endow Miles with some spider powers. I thought the number 42 was going to be a recurring theme in this series, especially since it's the number drawn in a lottery that gets Miles into the elite Visions Academy high school alternative in New York, and instead, we don't really see this number again. So more likely, it was just a not-so-subtle nod to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Also, what kind of school literally does a lottery to determine who gets in? Is that a thing? Miles is not just a repeat of Peter, though. While he has all of Peter's powers, he also has stealth camo mode and a venom blast that sends a jolt of electricity through his opponents after a few moments, which he spends most of the first story arc learning about. We also see he got his powers while Peter was still alive. In fact, he even shows up to Pete's final battle and sees him die. Later at Parker's funeral, he asks Gwen why he became Spider-Man, and she decides to answer him, explaining all the stuff about power and responsibility normal Spider-Man get from Uncle Ben. Miles decides this means it's now his responsibility to be Spider-Man, so he puts on a Spider-Man Halloween costume and goes out to fight crime. He's stopped by Spider-Woman, Jessica Drew, who in this universe is a female clone of Peter Parker. The Ultimates consider forcing him to stop his superhero career, but after he helps them stop Electro, they give him the okay and even a new costume. So finally, on the last page of issue 5 in the first story arc, we see Miles in his own costume. Yeah, this comic is not fast. Bendis may be many things as a writer, but brief and to the point is not one of them. His writing style actually gets on my nerves some in this comic. In particular, there's the fact that he gives every character the same speech mannerisms, which makes it hard to feel out how each character is unique, if they even are. That can make it difficult to like Miles, especially if you've read earlier comics, because it makes it hard to see how he's different than Peter. There also isn't a lot to the plot of this comic, just the opening story followed by one of Miles dealing with his supervillain uncle realizing he's Spider-Man and trying to take advantage of that. Then there's a tie-in with the United We Stand / Divided We Fall crossover event, a Venom arc, and then a concluding arc. Along the way, he only even faces off against a handful of villains. His only major opponents, that is, with fights or consequences lasting more than a couple pages, are Prowler, Venom, and Taskmaster. There is some buildup around an Ultimate Universe Scorpion, who is a weird gang leader that hired Prowler to steal from Oscorp during that bit that opened the series, but he ends up being pretty anticlimactic and is dealt with pretty quickly. Aside from that, we get very brief appearances from some villains clearly intended to be throwaway characters. These are Omega Red, Ringer, if you can believe that name, Batroc the Leaper, and Rhino. And that's really it. He also joins the Ultimates in fighting Hydra and some of their superpowered people, if you want to count that. Miles' personal life is also pretty uncomplicated. Most of the emotional impact of this comic is focused on who he is, though, so this is really where the comic shines. We only see 3 family members throughout the series. That's Uncle Aaron Davis, who I've mentioned, his mother Rio Morales, and his father Jefferson Davis. And, okay, who at Marvel okayed naming a black man after the President of the Confederacy? What the hell, Marvel? The relationship between brothers Jefferson and Aaron is important. It seems when they were young, they were both thieves, only Jeff grew up and tried to become a good person, whereas Aaron only expanded on his "the world owes me, so f*** you" personality. This is Miles' equivalent of the Great Power speech from Uncle Ben, with Jefferson stressing the importance of knowing right from wrong and being a good person. I can't help but feel like they could have gone further with this concept, emphasizing that because of the color of his skin, he would be blamed for crimes whether he was guilty of them or not, and the really important thing would be discerning which battles were worth standing up and fighting. This would be doubly so for Miles, since he's also a Spider-Man who is a media darling when it comes to finding scapegoats for negative stories. I guess I can't blame Bendis for not wanting to go overboard with the political justice of it all, though. Like I said, it was hard enough for people to accept the change of character as it was, without them trying to shove themes of social inequalities down their throats on top of it. Still, I can't help but feel like this is a missed opportunity, but at least those themes are kind of there if you want to read them into the story. Miles' dad is also resentful towards superheroes in general, which prompts Miles to feel extra careful about keeping his secret identity. Despite that, Jeff still feels the call for heroism when Hydra attacks. At one point, he's arrested by S.H.I.E.L.D. agents for causing a scene at a blockade, and Hydra shows up to free him in the hopes that he would join their team. Instead, he goes all Rambo on them. Later, he also attempts to help Spider-Man face off against Venom, which ends with him getting hospitalized, with injuries never really specified, though we do see him walking with a cane later in the series. He's not the only casualty of the Venom story. Miles' mom gets accidentally shot by police while Venom is attacking the hospital where they took Jefferson. All she was trying to do was help. I don't know why they felt the need to kill her or what purpose her death serves. It feels pretty messed up and mean-spirited to me. The whole Venom story actually seems like it was written just to needlessly kill women. Issue 16.1, which took place before issues 17 through 19 and serves as an introduction to this arc, mostly just involved us watching Betty Brant walking around being a terrible person before Venom just murders her. There's also a moment where Venom does get his only 2 male murders in, but even that scene ends with us lingering on a lady's terror before she, too, gets killed. Outside of his family, Miles is also very close to Genki. Genki is a young, overweight Korean nerd boy who loves Legos, but, who doesn't love Legos? Genki is Miles' closest friend and confidant. Miles shares his spider secret with Genki, and the two share a very close bond. Really close, I guess, as people keep making comments about just how close. This is supposed to be funny, I guess, because being gay is funny? Genki is a great supporting character, though, and Miles couldn't be Spider-Man without him. Genki is even the one who figures out how to make the web fluid formula that Peter came up with after Aunt May and Gwen Stacy deliver it to Miles. They show up, very briefly, mostly to pass the torch and help legitimize the character. Genki and Miles are roommates at Vision Academy, along with another guy who never seems to be considered important enough to get a name. They say a name once, but I'm not even sure if it was supposed to be the character's name or just a random thing they called him. They're also kind of total douchebags to him, even though he seems like a cool guy. I'd watch out, yo. He looks a lot like Alex from Runaways, and we all know how that turned out. Well, you do if you've read Runaways. Man, I need to review Runaways. Lastly, there's Katie Bishop. She becomes Miles' girlfriend in the final arc. There's actually some build-up to this happening, as we see her in the background watching Miles a few times throughout the series. Then, after his mom dies and Miles has screamed, "No more!" while ripping up his costume, we just skip a year into the future and they're already together. It's actually kind of a shame that we don't see how these two ended up getting together. That's important character development we'll never get. We never really get any development on Katie, or learn anything about her beyond that she likes Miles, thinks Genki is gay for him, and maybe doesn't like Legos. Wait, what? Blasphemy! I do love Katie's look though, and actually all the art in this series is pretty great. The main artists are Sarah Pichelli, who does 10 of the 29 issues, and the prequel contained in Ultimate Fallout number 4, and David Marquez, who does 16 issues. The art from both of them is very strong, and actually looks pretty similar, especially with Justin Ponser's amazing colors filling every single issue of this series. There are differences in their art though, and I'm going to let you guess which one of them drew this shot. Just consider if there's anything about this picture that speaks to you to suggest whether it was drawn by a man or a woman. Just anything. Perhaps the most notable thing about the art of this series, though, is the sheer number of times that they do 2-page spreads. It's a lot. By my count, there's about 70 double-page spreads in this entire series. 70. That's more than 2 per issue. That's 140 pages. That's over 6 issues worth of pages done in double-page spreads. Now, that may seem like a weird thing to complain about, and it is. I'm not really complaining, because I appreciate their attempt to change up their panel layouts. But let's talk comic design for a second. The area between 2 pages is called the gutter, because it falls off and stuff can get lost down there. Now, in a single issue, the gutter isn't that big of a deal, because you can usually lay the comic pretty flat on a table to get anything lost in the middle. Digitally, it's not really an issue at all because they eliminate the gutter from the digital version. However, these kinds of pages can be a pain to try to follow digitally, and might require a ton of zooming in and out and moving all around the page to follow the correct panel flow. In collected editions, the gutter can become bigger, causing you to lose more in the middle due to the increased number of pages and a different binding style, making it much harder to lay the book flat. It amazes me how little consideration this creative team paid to this kind of reading, especially considering Bendis' slow plot development lends itself much more to binge reading collections than it does to picking up individual issues each month. So, I appreciate your attempts to be stylistic, but maybe vary things up a little bit more and try a few less double-page spreads. The final arc shows that Miles has been living up to his no more promise and just living his life like a normal teenager. Genki, Jessica Drew, and Gwen Stacy are all getting pretty fed up with him not taking his responsibility as Spider-Man, and before long they convince him to get back in the webs. This is all happening alongside the Ultimate Universe appearance of Cloak and Dagger. It's nice to finally get these two, especially since they've been teasing their Ultimate Universe appearance for years now in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. This C&D are a product of experiments by Roxxon, as is another superhero who shows up, Bombshell. Roxxon, another corporation in the Ultimate Universe, is trying to create super soldiers like Oscorp had, with a group led by Roxxon himself and his Brain Trust. This group consists of characters well known in the normal 616, mostly as bad guys except for Layla Millar, who was the girl from the X-Factor comics who quote-unquote knew stuff. Nathaniel Essex is Mr. Sinister, Stearns is the Hulk villain, the Leader, and Arnim Zola was a Nazi scientist Captain America fought in World War II, and this is presumably his grandson. Roxxon, which I still can't believe we're supposed to buy that is actually somebody's name, reveals himself as the villain who hired the Prowler to steal from Oscorp, so essentially the guy who kicked this whole series off, except they previously said Scorpion hired Prowler. So I guess Roxxon hired Scorpion to hire Prowler? Which may explain why Scorpion had superpowers, as he may be another of Roxxon's experiments. So, okay. This final arc feels very rushed and somewhat disappointing. Clearly the comic was coming to an end, and Bendis wanted to get to this arc before it did, exposing the shadowy corporation behind all the evil entering Miles' life. It's actually a little disappointing that there wasn't more build-up. It seemed like they were just starting to build up Roxxon as a major villain, and then they were gone. And since they're done, I am too, so on to the breakdown. This comic is short. Very short. Between having only 29 issues, with barely 5 fleshed out story arcs to fill them, Bendis' writing style that leaves a lot of open panels for pacing, and the number of double-page spreads, this comic is a very quick and light read, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Bendis does a good job of making you like Miles, and Pichelli and Marquez's great art make him very expressive. It's clear to see, even with so little comic, why Miles has stolen so many hearts and become one of Marvel's biggest new characters. And that's why I'm giving this series a 7 out of 10. Mainly the shortness of the series and some issues with Bendis' writing style keep me from loving this comic, but it's a good strong series nonetheless. Thank you everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video running down the history of Miles Morales. Feel free to watch some of my other videos, and if you did enjoy this, please make sure to click the A on the left side of the screen in order to subscribe for future videos. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time, right here on the Comic Cave.